that are causing you to look and put a label on yourself. I don't like people putting labels on themselves anyway, because I think that just creates a nice convenient box for everybody. But anyway, his issues were an alcoholic father, no relationship. This is just as recently as 3 weeks ago. And a lot of young men especially, we find the young women just want to experiment in lesbianism and witchcraft and a whole bunch of other things that are going on in the schools. But for the young men, because I think we as a society have robbed sort of people of their identity, whether they're men or women, and in their roles too as mothers and fathers, that nobody knows what they're supposed to be doing anymore. So we have, I think, a duty to make sure that the truth gets out there. And you get called all kinds of names, and you get people with comments, and is it a choice and all this? Well, it's a choice, it's nature and nurture, and it's a combination. I believe ultimately people have the choice, but sometimes that choice is limited by their genetic makeup, on their ability to deal with things. That's why you can have 4 children from the same family go through a divorce situation, and you'll have 4 different responses to that. Let's not just couple everybody into one big blanket and say everybody should deal with life this way. No.
Thank you.
Well, I didn't think it was that complicated, but no.
You made it simple.
You're very welcome. But for the purposes of this discussion, and you know what's tough about issues of homosexuality? You always find you have to be explaining yourself. I'm getting kind of tired of that too.
I just want to change it the direction totally here. I have a niece that lives in Kelowna, unfortunately, and she's a single mother, doing her damnedest to raise 2 children.
Yeah.
Recently, one of her children had a vaccine, ended up in the hospital 2 months later with severe stomach problems, and because she refused an operation by the doctor for exploratory surgery, she took her child out, and of course, the welfare people arrived on her doorstep. She managed to fight that off.
Good.
Partly because I told her, make sure you get a tape recorder, like right now.
Yep.
Yep, and that helped her. But now she's had someone else who's phoned and sicked them on her again. How many chances does she have before they get those children?
Take my card and say, my mom heard you speak when you were in Salmon Armis. She gets if they bug her, okay? But please tell her to document everything, okay? I mean, down to the time of the social work call, who the social worker is, and use words like harassment. Like they'll say, well, we're just here, but I've found that you can hold government accountable. I did a little bit of an experiment last census when they came out with the long one, and they were asking all kinds of questions that I don't believe that they had any right to do. So of course I didn't fill it out, and I mostly did it out against sport, you know, to see what would happen. And they didn't you know, leave me too long, and they were calling saying, Ms. Simpson, you need to fill out that census. It's by law. It's by law. I'm going, well, I'm not sure it's by law. Can somebody please provide me the law? You know, because I really want to make sure what I'm doing is legal here, because I didn't understand that the state could ask me all these questions. So we went for a few months, and we get calls. Then they started arriving at my door. And this was getting to be real fun. I said, well, you know, I've been asking for the law and the court decisions around anyone who's challenged this, and to date, nobody's provided me with anything. You have to do this. Well, who says I have to? You're telling me I have to. Well, who told you I had to, and where did you see it in law? Because maybe you can answer my questions for me. And sure enough, they couldn't. So finally, the head honcho started phoning, and I said, look, this is the way it is. I'm going to charge you with harassment if you keep this up, unless you provide me with this information that I know you have to give me, if you can. And I haven't heard from him again. So we need to, we are the head, we are not the tail. And I think that's where as citizens we're so conditioned to comply, 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 rather than question, question, question. Where our children are involved, it's a little bit dicier, because it's not like, you know, we may all be willing to go to jail or fight the good fight, but when they take our children, it's a very different situation. Know your rights. She does not have to answer the door. She can close the door. If she feels the situation is getting intensified, she should get her kids out of there and then go deal with the authorities. And we've dealt with lots of cases like that, where we just don't play their game. You change the rules of the game, and then you get to make your decisions. Okay?
Kari, just for the record, because there were some comments made off mic, and I just want to be very clear on this, because I was left a little confused after that little interaction. did you say that all HIV and AIDS in North America, Canada, only Canada, not just...
No, because we've got different factors coming into the U.S. because we've got so much immigration happening from Africa and from different things. The population's a little bit different, but in 100%, 99.99% of Canadian HIV identified situations, the person who has it can either identify a dirty needle or infected a partner.
Okay.
And there's two types of HIV too, Kim. We need to, this is information that's coming out of Africa with the studies that they've done now. Okay, the strains are different.
I've read in a Live magazine recently that you can have an HIV positive test for such things as cold, flu, and pregnancy. What really is HIV?
You know, everybody's back on the antibodies and this and that, and I think the whole testing of whether you're pregnant, whether you have breast cancer, cervical cancer, or HIV or AIDS or anything else, there is so much scrutiny because we're testing so massively for so many things now that we've lost the precision in it as well. That's a whole nother area. I don't care if anyone does go to the doctor here. No, but we tell everybody who comes to our way, get at least 2 or 3 tests before you even start being concerned about things. It depends on the body's reaction, depends on all the junk that's in your system. It depends on whether or not you've been vaccinated and the interactions. It depends on whether you're on cold medicines or what have you, because we have this is not a pure project anymore when we do testing, because people are on so many different drugs and antibiotics, medications, and stuff that's already in their system, whether it's through vaccinations, inoculations, whatever, that it's such a Molotov cocktail in there that to say this is the standard and because we see this and not factor in any of the other discussions is useless. And I mean, this is where the testing gets a little bit dubious at best. So no, if you do have a doctor, make sure they're up to speed on how everything factors into the testing, whether it changes the testing, whether it gives you a false positive. You need to be aware of all of those issues now. I mean, especially the pregnancy and cervical cancer issues. I mean, there have been just too many misdiagnoses on those things. And again, it's only going to be when it starts costing them enough money through lawsuits that we see some accountability, but then, of course, it's just passed on to us because they just up the insurance rates, and that costs taxpayers, those who are paying tax, even more money.
Kari, I have a question. I have 2 nephews that unfortunately the ministry has. And my greatest concern with this is the fact that they are pumping these children full of drugs, liazepine, Ritalin. I mean, things that we now have overwhelming evidence showing is going to do nothing but produce little zombies out of them. Yep. And it's against totally what their mother wants, but yet they're just forcing it upon them. And well, I would like you to address that, please.
They technically can't. They will do what they want to do because they think they're gods unto themselves unless they're held into account. So what I would encourage, I mean, what part of the world is she in?
Well, actually, one of them, they've actually separated the boys.
Of course. Well, that's in their best interest,
and
you know.
One's in Burnaby, and they've actually done everything they could to deliberately keep them apart. And they're now 13 and 11.
Well, if we have normally functioning kids, we don't have the need for services and all. You know, anytime you see the word services attached to things government, change those S's to dollar signs, and that's what it's about. It's about creating as much dysfunction. Not that it's intentional, and this is what's always so hard, because there's lots of good social workers. There's a lot of people who are very well-intentioned. They are just so well-intentioned they're going to follow the policy and the procedure without questioning whether or not it truly makes sense. If she's down in the Lower Mainland, your sister, have her call me, and I'll tell her what we would do in those situations. I mean, we try to help as many families through the advocacy, because if we're involved, then suddenly everybody gets accountable, and suddenly everybody's doing what they're supposed to, and suddenly children are going back home. But there's only so many cases. I mean, we deal with about 400 cases a year, which maxes us out. But what we would do in that case is have her write to the ministry so that there's a written record in very precise terms. Please advise what medical condition my children have that has been diagnosed by a doctor that requires this treatment, and what are the goals that you expect to achieve through this treatment, or are you prescribing medications to my child without, you know, if you put the accountability, get the paper train happening there, we can make things happen. Okay?
Any other questions? Okay. Well, Kari, thank you for outstanding talk and
Yeah.
very
There's thank you. There's lots of information over there, so please just help yourselves to it. If anyone wants to be put on our email list, please just make sure I've got your name and email, and we'll make sure that you are included on that.
We have a late question here.
There's always
Questions are
one,
good.
you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just heard a bit about it being in Saskatchewan. This is a BC case about, and kind of the question is, it was a couple in the valley, I'm not sure, in the Okanagan, where, with regards to the fact that they were in court because their 14-year-old son had died of diabetes because they were with a Christian fundamentalist group that said God will heal all problems.
Well,
And didn't provide the treatment. What was the outcome? Is that case, is it settled?
that one's before, but of course we had the one in Saskatchewan with the young boy who had the leg cancer, and he passed away. And you know, for those cases, this is where I say, I think in the diabetes case, the doctors even missed that case, if I'm not mistaken. And then it was later discovered that he had this, but I'm not up to speed. But I can speak generally on that because we had a case not unlike that one here in BC where a young girl at 13 years of age was apprehended, and she was going to be forced to have a liver transplant against her will. And the family fortunately got a hold of me, and we were able to thwart the apprehension. We were able to hold the doctors accountable. Suddenly nobody really wanted to do the transplant. They sent a public health nurse every day to this family's door to watch this kid swallow prednisone, which created a whole nother health issue problems. And anyway, so the family said no more of this, and they put her on the homeopathic, and Rachel did brilliantly. She just came around. She had quality of life. She still had the liver condition that was problematic, and she went on till she was about 16 years of age. Now, by this time, BC had brought in the Infants Act, which is interesting because, of course, she should have been able to refuse whatever treatment she wanted and not have to worry about the state. Anyway, when she was 16, the family doctor said to the family, look, you guys are going to, we have to do something, you know, you have to make decisions one way or the other here. The liver was still not functioning. It was disintegrating. So some decisions had to be done. So the family decided to go down to Mexico to the Gerson Clinic. And they hadn't ruled out transplant at this point. They just wanted to wipe out any possibility of anything else happening before they did the transplant. Because once you do a transplant, that's it for life. And the ministry caught wind of this. Matter of fact, she got sick in the hot tub of her grandmother and had to go to hospital. When she got to the hospital, they came in and they apprehended her. At 16 years of age, they apprehended her. They put her in a drug-induced coma against her will and that of her parents. This is Langley, British Columbia, this is happening. We had the Infants Act. She should have been able to refuse treatment at any point and have that respected. Nobody would adhere to her. They transported her without her parents to Vancouver General Hospital, where they actively sought out a liver transplant. They were going to transplant her while she was in a coma, people. Okay? We went to court right away, and of course we were going to challenge the Infants Act on the grounds that this kid could refuse medical treatment. The government didn't want us to get the precedent, so they backed off. The doctor said, well, look, we can't do a transplant against somebody's will because psychologically you have to be in step with this thing because it's a life-changing, I mean, your whole life is dependent upon these drugs. Then when we started asking the doctors, because we hear about the success rates of liver transplants and all of this, but of course, once you start going beyond the 1 year, okay, well, 1 year success rate when you're all doped up and drugged up and your body's artificially in existence, what happens in the second, third, and fourth year? And of course, what we had was the death rate was just staggering as far as losing patients. Then it came out that she would only survive 12 years on the drugs that were out there, and quality of life was really something that was being challenged. Anyway, make a long story short, but it was 3 weeks, and this was the critical time that this family lost as far as when they could have been down in Mexico doing the cleansing and all the rest of it, and she died when they finally, 4 weeks after, when they got her there. So they didn't come after her. That was probably the hardest case that I've ever been on. But Rachel at 16, I think, was wise beyond her years. And that quality of life and what she had, she would never have had on all the drugs and the transplants. And who's to say that transplants work? And, you know, it's really tough, but when the medical profession does all it does and the kids die anyway, nobody says or thinks anything, right? You know, and there's far more of those cases than the ones on this other side. These are the three that we know about and we hear about, but, you know, how many youngsters are dying from, you know, failed transplants? They use these kids as experiments 3 and 4, and you know, so it's a tough issue. Anything to deal with children and the heart issues are always the toughest, but people need to stand on what they believe there, and fortunately in these cases, these kids seem to be really strong beyond their years. So.
Yeah, actually confirm that. I asked that question of Dr. Cherry, and he did confirm that it's a money game, that a lot of these transplants, their life expectancy and quality of life after is abysmal, but it makes lots of money.
Yeah, well, that was the research dollars and all the rest of it that go into it. More late questions.
When you started, you were talking about getting married and having a marriage certificate and how that puts the child born under that marriage into the hands of the government. Let me ask you something. If you're still married and you want to get divorced but stay together, will that undo that that child?
Definitely not. Not especially if you've acquired benefits, right? I mean, you know, quite honestly, I think we as a society have to rethink everything we do. Divorce is another industry. And for whatever reason, we keep playing in their game. And I'm not sure what it's going to take to get our sensibilities about us and quit doing that. But whether, you know, I don't care who you are, if you're paying taxes, you're involved in the divorce industry, because legal services, which is a huge cost. We have people who come into our office all the time who have 5 kids from 4 different fathers. I was going to say 6 different fathers, but that wouldn't, additionally, that wouldn't work. Yeah, but, you know, I mean, it's just, and they're all on welfare, and they're collecting legal services because their kids have been apprehended. So you have like triple dipping into the tax pool, because, and then the legal aid lawyers just keep it dragging out, because where they make their money is in court, not in preparation, because they make more money in the court, so they want as many court appearances as possible, which means that we need more judges, because for all those court appearances we have to have judges and sheriffs and all the rest of it to go with it. So no, it doesn't undo. The state will find a way to be involved in your life if you let them.
Okay, so take that a next step further. Let's say we have our kids. You obviously you have one with 20 years of age?
4. Yeah,
no,
19.
19, yeah. I have 19 and 18-year-old as well. And what are you going to suggest to them? Are you going to suggest marriage, or do we go to somebody who does like a sovereign marriage and just does sort of a common law marriage, if you will, and this quietly lives together based on the vows that we've taken between ourselves?
Well, you know, I'm going that because I think the state, and I think this is where the church needs to separate themselves, whether they're going to be an arm of the state or a church, you know. And I mean, organized religion, that's another subject for another day, because, you know, you're very good ones and you're very statist ones, shall we say. But, you know, I think people are going to have to really evaluate those things. You know, we thought a little bit about getting, and know down the States what they're doing is they're having different forms of marriage recognized under the law, right? And if you have a religious marriage, then there is no such thing as no-fault divorce. There isn't anything about splitting 50-50. If somebody steps out of that marriage contract, you know, through infidelity, for instance, you forfeit everything, which would do a great thing for marriages, I think. You know, if you looked at marriage like a business deal, we'd probably have better secure family situations for a lot of kids. But I think, going back to your question, people are going to have to ask themselves, what is motivating me? Is it the conditions? Is it the societal conditioning that says I want this? Or is this because it means to us? And do I want the state involved?
Taking it the next step.
No, dear.
All right.
How many steps are there?
Well, first of all, what I'm trying to do is determine, is there a time, if you don't get a state license, and you're quote unquote married with each other, if you will, and no state license on that, or provincial license, and you have kids. If that child is born in a hospital, they are registered almost immediately now. Is there a way of not registering them?
Before you even get registered, every child that's born in a hospital or with the company of a government official or someone touched, you are being assessed. They have assessments now. Every mother giving birth is assessed in the hospital by the government.
Isn't that exciting? So is there a way, what I'm trying to do is find out, is there a way of escaping the fact that the government's got its claws on you? If you come out without a birth certificate, you can never get a passport. Right. That kind of thing.
You know, the thing is, this is where we got to balance our understanding of the issue with the fear issues, and do we stand up? If we're concerned enough about what is happening, are we concerned enough to leave here and go and do something about it? In other words, bring another 10 people that we know, invite 5 people next year back to the conference to be informed, right? This is where we can either let fear, because I mean, we are supposed to be the government, and when we start taking that role seriously, I think is when we're going to start seeing things change. When we start defining the role of government in our lives, we're going to see those things change. But we keep giving the government all this license. You know, when I hear people say, you know, in France, like last night, and this is where the French government's passing a law to outlaw mind control. Sorry, I get scared. Number one, the state having to do something like that, it shouldn't even be involved in those things. Whenever those are crimes against humanity, you can have one big clause for that. But the other thing is, who's going to define what mind control is? Because if I as a parent aren't controlling my children, then the government's going to be. And take your question further, okay? Look at what the state's doing. You don't even have to be married. You don't even have to have your own children, okay? If you're providing a role of a parent, I mean, for instance, I'm a single mother of 4 kids. I don't want to get involved in an in-house relationship, because if he comes with children, not only am I responsible then for his kids and can be taken and sued for child support for his children based on my family income, but that half my assets go. And what is it? It's about the state creating jobs for all those lawyers who write the laws so they can be involved in every, you know, humanist area that we're involved in and make money off of it.
The last question has to do with you personally.
Oh, no.
How are you going to recommend your children proceed so that they can live with people, let's say, their spouses, if you will, and raise their own kids? How are you going to recommend that they set up their lives to be the best for them in this province? I want to ask you that.
Well, in my household, it's a dictatorship. Democracy does not exist. And I can say, and that's for starters, you know, I'm one of those parents, I do not believe in being a friend to my children. I am their mother, and that is it. And don't go there. And I can say with deep, deep pride that I have 4 great kids who are on track, who know the lay of the land, who have been savvy. And I think that's probably the greatest gift we can give our kids, is understanding the times, but you can't place them in a spirit of fear. You have to give them license to be involved and to change things and to speak. And I mean, certainly my children, just by the nature of their life, which is anything but normal with me as a mother, they get exposed to those kinds of things. So it's using wisdom. But you know what? There's no guarantees in life, and that's part of life. If everything's perfect, I think we'd all be rather boring, quite honestly. You know, it's those value decisions. It's the people who come through the door. I mean, my 16-year-old son, who's 6'2", takes very seriously his role of, you know, culling the potential boyfriends of his 14-year-old sister, much to her chagrin, you know. But that's what it's about, right? And, you know, you build, I think the greatest gift we can give our families is strong families. And we miss the boat when we start buying hook, line, and sinker into all the nonsense that's out there, whether it's daycare. I left work as a commercial pilot to raise my children. And that is the greatest privilege and gift that I have ever been given. And that's the privilege of being a mother to my children, first and foremost. As they've gotten older, my schedule has always been around my kids, and they know, regardless of who I'm meeting or where I am, they just pick up the phone and Mom is there. You know, we have to, life circumstances, I mean, my ex decided 7 years ago that he had to go find himself, you know, which is, he's still looking, you know, but that's okay. You know, but I think that's, you know, still nothing is perfect in life, and it's what you do as a family. But I can tell you, all the stuff that we have listened to over this weekend, we can combat through one very effective thing, and that's raising strong families who are wise and understanding and operate out of a spirit of boldness and of courage and of love, not one out of fear. because that if we're afraid, then we don't do anything. Like that the greatest thing we have to fear is our inability to get enough courage to do something. We need to speak up. We need to use wisdom in how we do that. We need to be bold in how we do that. And everybody says, well, Kari, aren't you? I mean, the International Socialists, I said we would talk about, to me, this is the greater problem as far as who wants to change the identity. When they saw the popularity of the Citizens Research Institute and our ability to mobilize masses of people to do something about it, they got very scared. And I spoke in 2 places where they held riots. In Victoria, we had to have 15 undercover officers. We had 2 full squadrons of RCMP outside. This is Victoria, to a parents' meeting, because they saw people being given license to be involved, which concerns the agents of the state who want to keep us divided, feeling apologetic for our points of view, or in fear from speaking up. We gave people license to be out there. I said, look, if you can't be constructively critical, be cynical. If you can't be cynical, be totally unreasonable, and we're far better off than where we are sitting in quietness and in complacency. So the International Socialists have become very concerned about what we're doing, and of course they're the ones that organize and control all the universities that are paid for with our tax dollars. We're our own worst enemies for, thank God people aren't paying taxes. That's all I can say. Bless you, right? Because when the money supplies get cut off and government gets back to doing what it's supposed to be doing, we cure most of what we've been here over these weekends about. It's about money and power and the identity of this nation.
Hi, Kari. After the seminar, give me a dingle and I'll help you rewrite that Declaration of Family Rights into the truth. Make it a lot tighter yet.
Oh no, we have actually, we're having fun with it because that's what we've got the law, Bruce. That wasn't the issue. We wanted to get the Human Rights Commission. Actually, I'm filing in September a complaint about the discriminatory funding formulas to independent and homeschoolers, because I think if we can get rid of the stronghold with all the money going to the public indoctrination system, give parents true choice, then we're going to see a lot of the system get cleaned up. At least parents will have a choice. So the Supreme Court of Canada has already said that provinces have the right to give monies to independent schools if they want to. Our government chooses not to. To me, that's discrimination against everybody who wants either a religiously or moral-based education and or an alternative form of education for their children. So what we're going to be doing is filing a discriminatory funding thing that the state is discriminating against hundreds and hundreds and thousands of parents in this province. So that should create quite a bit of kerfuffle. And then the one that follows in on those heels is we have a human rights complaint going against the Human Rights Commission itself for discriminatory practices, because we can prove now what cases it takes and which ones it dismisses, and it's quite evident to see a very large pattern of bias towards the politically correct ones. So, you've got to keep going and pushing the fence back, and I can just speak to this. Is the next speaker here yet?
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay, well, then I'll finish with this. I think where we have come to as a society is, and I explain it this, if every morning I wake up and I look outside my back window and I see the farmer behind me moving the fence, and the first day I go out and I see him out there in the bright early morning out there moving the fence, and that first day I go, what is he doing? And as a nice person who really doesn't want to get involved, I say, oh, well, the fence must have been put in the wrong place. And the next morning I get up to see if he's out there, and there he is again, and this time he's moving the fence 2 feet into my land. And now, because I just don't want to deal with it, I go, oh, well, he just must need more space, right? And this is the government encroaching into our area. And I don't even like the word government. I'll use the statist, because we supposedly are the government. The statist moving into our land. The next morning I get up and he's moving at 5 feet into my land, and why shouldn't he? I haven't said anything at this point, right? Our liberties, our freedoms, our rights are being encroached upon. The next day I get up and he's not there, and I go, oh, okay, well, I can live with that loss of my land in this supposedly free nation. I get up the next morning just to make sure that he's not doing it, and there he is again with 15 people moving at 10 feet into my land, and this goes on every day. Till finally I'm looking out my window and he's looking right back in at my house. And I think it's at what time do we as Canadians say enough is enough? Not only are we going to say no more, but we're going to put the fence back where it is and restore this land called Canada back to where it should be. Thanks. And I have to, Kim will not forgive me if I don't say this. Bev Schneider, whose literature is up there, she is the woman that was accused of having Munchausen syndrome by proxy by the doctors at Children's Hospital. She was falsely accused. We can prove it beyond a shadow of doubt. The doctors lied. The courts covered it up because the judges and the doctors are all friends, wink, wink, nod, nod. And a handicapped child of a single mother was expendable to keep everybody's reputations in line. She will be speaking October 19th in Vancouver. You can call the Preferred Network. Her story is on the table over there, and it's an important story that all of us should be aware of. Thanks again.